This guy's video title claims he can prove God exists. It's called Proof God Exists. 5 arguments you need to hear. You know me too well, video guy. I am feeling a little starved for arguments. I think I do need to hear these. I've heard so few arguments today, I'm starting to get lightheaded.
Hello everybody, I'm JP, and today we're going to be dealing with 5 things that prove there is a God.
I love your room. One of the best rooms we've had on the channel, possibly ever. Top 5 at least. The wood paneling, the wall calendar, the shaded lamp. It's classic, it's classy. The only things that could make it better are if it didn't have a computer in it, or a guy making a proof of God video. Other than that, though, like 9.6 out of 10.
Now, I know I've probably triggered some of you already because...
Why did you use an AI-generated Labubu to represent being triggered? Look, I'll confess to not always being the best at interpreting symbolism, but in this case, I don't think it's my problem.
Because you can't really prove or disprove there is a God.
I'm not sure if with that you're referring to something about people being agnostic, or something about certainty, or something about the definition of the word prove. It could be any one of those, but regardless of your reason, I'm more than happy for you not to use the term. It's still in the title, though.
So let's just say 5 things that point to there is a God. So
5 pieces of evidence for the existence of God. Sure, I can go with that. I already like that you're toning down the language a little bit. You're showing some restraint here. This isn't the all too common, this is 100% absolute undeniable proof of the existence of God, which is always very silly. And I'll point out, likewise, that my objections in the video are not absolute proof that your points are wrong or your evidence doesn't point to what you think it does or anything like that. I think that the things that you raise here don't point to the thing that you think they do in the way that you think they do, with the clarity that you think they do. That's the point of this video and all of my videos. I don't find this kind of stuff to compellingly lead me to the theistic conclusion. I don't even find them compelling as individual bits of evidence. And so the point of my video is just to try to explain why I don't see it that way, and how I see it instead, which can be taken or left at the whim of whoever's listening. I think you're wrong, but whether you actually are wrong, well, God only knows. If that.
As is my modus operandi, I'm going to try to tackle this in about 5 minutes, so...
There's something a bit weird about this. He talks as if this is something he does regularly. This is his MO. This is the established thing that he does. But this is a brand new channel, and this is the first video on the channel. And I'll say too, and you can take this as a compliment, this guy seems reasonably good at speaking on camera. A lot of people's first videos are really awkward, and this doesn't have a lot of that. And the reason I mention these things is his face feels so familiar to me. I feel like I know that face from somewhere. Does he do other stuff on YouTube, or am I confusing him with a movie actor, or what's going on here? Or maybe there's nothing, but if there's an obvious answer that I'm missing, somebody inform me, please. You know what? During editing, I think I figured it out. Mr. Orange from Reservoir Dogs. I think that's the one. That's awesome. If you're gonna look like somebody, that's a pretty decent one. I got told David Harbour a couple of times when I posted my face video. I guess I'm okay with that.
Here we go. Number 1, the human-animal gap. Now, if you haven't noticed, us Homo sapiens, i.e. humans, are far more intelligent than the next animal, making us more capable and therefore more dominant than any other animal on this entire planet.
Some people are probably going to quibble about the idea of intelligence and the idea that we're more intelligent than other animals. I'm not going to quibble. Take any aspect of intelligence that you want. Understanding complex things, learning things, thinking things through, reasoned thought, problem solving, symbolic thought, abstract thought, mental adaptability, creativity, forward planning, and the things that go along with it, like tool use. It would be very hard to convince me that among the animals, humans are not the peak performers by any one of those metrics. Having said that, though, these are not uniquely human traits. These are not things that we do and other animals simply don't do. These are just things that we're especially good at. The mental capabilities of our species build upon what was already there previously. We took the ball and ran with it. We didn't make the ball. You also say that we're more capable and dominant than any other animal. And those are easier to object to just on the grounds that they're less defined. Terms like those can apply to a much wider range of traits and abilities and circumstances. I mean, we're capable of exerting our will and killing basically whatever we feel like if we feel like it enough. Although depending what it is, maybe not without our own casualties. If there's some weird kind of bacteria present in a person, for example, we can destroy it, but we might end up destroying the person in the process. But regardless, that's a form of dominance, control over the life and death of other organisms, and of course we're capable of making things that other animals just simply can't. On the other hand, there's a lot of stuff that other animals are capable of that we are not capable of unassisted, inborn capabilities that we need tools produced by our intelligence to achieve. We need to give ourselves powers that other animals already have, but we can give ourselves most of those powers to some extent. There are also animals that vastly outnumber us and even outweigh us in terms of biomass. And one thing I would ask too is, why are we only considering animals? If you consider plants, bacteria, fungi, archaea, protists, viruses, the balance shifts significantly. But okay, fine, we'll stick to animals. Another thing to think about here is, you're saying that our intelligence is the thing that makes us so dominant and capable, and of course that's a factor, but I would argue that our social nature is at least as important. The way that we interact with each other socially, where we tend to constantly insist upon actions that benefit the group, and strongly discourage actions that don't, and building up these complex systems of cooperation, while of course all imperfect, are extremely powerful. And then when you add the high intelligence to that, you get quite a potent mix. I don't think you could just drop one or the other and expect it to work out as well as it has for humanity. I think these are interconnected and mutually supporting. Without either of them, you would end up at a much more modest level of success. Especially because I don't really see these things as entirely separate properties. I see them feeding back into each other. An increase in social capability can allow for an increase in intelligence, and an increase in intelligence can allow for increased social capability. But regardless, yes, we're highly intelligent and very successful.
By a huge margin. So why is that? Now remember, scientists will compare the smartest animals in the world to about a 5-year-old child. And if you haven't noticed, 5-year-old children really aren't that much of a genius.
Don't underestimate 5-year-olds. They're a lot smarter than they get credit for. Regardless though, sure, they're less capable of reasoning than, say, an adult human. But if a non-human animal is as smart as a 5-year-old, then we're talking about a difference in degree of capacity for thought, not of kind, which is what you find in the differences between every other trait between animals. Why are blue whales so big? Did you know that a large elephant only weighs as much as a very young blue whale? You're going to see differences between different species in how strongly different traits are manifested. And when you go to the extremes, when you go to the fastest, the biggest, the smartest, the ones whose ancestors had a lot of selection pressure applied to that one particular thing, of course you're going to be able to make these comparisons. This is expected. This is what evolution does. It selects for different things in different populations, in different environments with different pressures and different circumstances. Different survival strategies lead to increasing difference. And then here you are, shocked to find yourself a member of a species that's different from other species.
Now, these intelligent animals on our planet include orangutans, dolphins, African gray parrots, and even octopuses. Octopuses. Octopussy. But again, why this huge brain gap? The answer that you'll sometimes hear is humans may have eliminated other species that showed early signs of developing high intelligence, preventing a rival from emerging.
You're reading and showing a quote, but you don't say or show where it comes from, including in the description of your video. That's a very weird thing to do, because it's as if you're reading this quote to try to lend your point some sort of legitimacy, to say, look, somebody actually said this, but then you don't tell me who said it. You give no context as to where this is from. Now, I went and looked. I didn't find anything. I tried searching around manually. I went to a couple of different LLMs and asked them, and both of them said, go read Thomas Suddendorf's The Gap, The Science of What Separates Us from Other Animals. This is clearly where that quote's from. Well, it's not. I checked. So where's this quote from? Is it a quote from anywhere? Did you just make it up? Did you get it from ChatGPT? Who knows? You don't tell me. It's very possible, though, that regardless of where this comes from, it's meant to be a reference to Thomas Suddendorf's work or something similar. He writes about the mental gap between humans and other animals, specifically between humans and other great apes, and he posits that this may be partially explained by Homo sapiens playing a role in the elimination of other hominins, which doesn't seem very far-fetched considering the habits of our species in general.
Yeah, so somehow we were quelling uprisings from other animals on both land and in the ocean. Remember, this list had dolphins on it. I don't think our ancestors were exactly preventing dolphins from evolving higher intelligence.
Again, who is saying this? You presented a quote as if it's something somebody else said, and now you're responding to it as if this is the position of your opponents on this issue, but there's no sign that anyone actually said this. It's unlikely that anyone said anything of the sort. When people talk about ancient humans eliminating organisms of similar levels of intelligence, they're talking about them like killing Neanderthals, not going to war with the dolphins. Now, although you're pointlessly arguing at the wall, there is at least something here that I should talk about, and that is, why are dolphins and other great apes, crows, octopuses, and so forth, highly intelligent relative to animals in general, but not at our level? Why are we seemingly at the peak with regard to this trait, or set of traits? Why do we seem so special? Well, to start with, there's a bit of the weak anthropic principle at play here. Why is the Earth so great for us to live on? Why are we at just the right distance from the sun to survive? Why is there the right amount of oxygen for us to breathe? Why is there water for us to drink? What are the chances of that? God must have made it that way just to suit us, who were defined beforehand to be as we are. Well, that's backwards. We can't be anywhere that doesn't meet those conditions because those conditions are required for us to be there. And so for us to be here thinking about why we're here and why things are so perfectly suited to us, we have to first be able to be here. Things have to be well suited to us. So there's a 100% chance of any organism that's thinking about this stuff originating in a place where it can originate. And similarly, for you to ask, why is our species so special? Why do we seem so unusually smart? That first has to be the case, or at least appear to be. Why are we so lucky? Why are we so strange? And especially, why us, specifically? Why not some other species? Well, because to ask a question like this, you have to ask it from the species that it is, not the one it's not. And therefore, the answer to why me, why us, is you're the one who can ask the question. So it has to be you. It has to be us. Now, I understand that that's not exactly what you're going for here. I just wanted to mention that layer of it regardless, just to be thorough, because I think that this is a way of thinking that although you're not specifically saying it, at least not right now, others do. But now onto the broader question of just, why does there seem to be one species that's so far ahead of the others? Why not multiple species like this? And for our purposes here, I'm just going to lump all hominins together and call that one group. I'll say that's the group we're in. Why is some other group not also as intelligent as we are? By whatever metrics that we want to define that. And your asking of this question is supposed to constitute some sort of evidence for God, as if you just assume that there could be no reasonable naturalistic explanation for it, or indeed any other kind. So with that in mind, let me explain what I think is a reasonable naturalistic explanation, one that may be debatable in the details, but in general terms at least has merit, just to show why I don't feel the need to jump immediately to the supernatural, let alone to God, as an explanation. Phenomena like this, and a lot of the other ones that you'll bring up in the video, admit of explanations that are based in observable, natural, real-world events. Physical needs, selection pressures, metabolic efficiency, availability of resources, and the methods of their acquisition and use. Things along these lines. Let me give you an example of what that kind of idea might look like, and you'll see that it's very much based in the sorts of conditions that persist today. Normal things that happen in the natural world. There's no need whatsoever to propose a miracle when you have explanations like this as possibilities, even if you don't accept the exact details of any particular one. So consider this possibility. There are multiple things that drive the effect of runaway human intelligence that individually probably aren't sufficient and are less likely to occur together than for at least one of them to be missing. I'll list off a few things that might contribute here. Being highly social is a big one. A lot of the most intelligent species on the planet, including us, are very, very social. Great apes, dolphins and orcas, elephants, crows, parrots. You mentioned octopuses, which are an exception. They're solitary, so being really social seems to play some role, but it's not strictly necessary. At least not to get up to a level that we would consider very intelligent overall. It might be necessary to get to our level. I think, though, the thing with an octopus is that its intelligence primarily comes from having to hide and to escape, and I think a lot of the intelligence that we see in them is in that narrow band that's relevant to those things. They've had no opportunity, really, to develop the sort of mental modeling that we have, which is called theory of mind, which is our ability that we derive from our social nature of being able to predict the thoughts of others, which I think would be a reflection and a driver of intelligence. And it's a very, very difficult, high-intensity cognitive activity. It doesn't really feel like that to us, but we don't have to consciously think about it. Our brain does a lot of the heavy lifting without exposing much of it consciously. Nevertheless, though, it is exceedingly complicated. Another thing about octopuses is they only live like 1 to 2 years, and that means they don't have a lot of opportunity to learn anything, and they also have a very different neurological structure. They have a pretty small central brain compared to us, and then separate clumps of neurons in their arms. It's kind of hard to say what level and what type of intelligence you could even achieve with that setup. It's not really any use speculating. It's kind of like talking about an alien. But I wouldn't see them as being seriously in the running as competition for us. If they are, it's not at all obvious. Along with being very social in our way comes the ability to learn from others, which other social species do as well. And our species has the benefit of a pretty decently long lifespan, so we can learn quite a bit and pass on quite a bit. And some of those things that we pass on would be the use of tools, which originally would most likely be no more complicated than anything a chimpanzee could do. But if that skill proves important enough for survival, if it's a bit harder to get food without tools, for example, then that ability will be selected for to some extent. And if it develops beyond some difficult to define extent. It could become so extremely beneficial that it becomes highly selected for and becomes that runaway effect. One of the tools that we learned to use was fire, which is a tool that became so extremely important to us that we actually need it now. We're nearly obligate cooks when it comes to meat and some other things that we eat, and that's incredibly unusual. In fact, it's unique. This implies that at some point before that became the case, we decided that cooking our food was really, really important. Something about it felt better to us, and that could have something to do with the fact that when you cook your food, it becomes more digestible and the calories become more available to your body with less work from your body. Essentially, we pre-digest our food in a way that organisms that live in the water have no opportunity to even try doing, and that frees up a lot of energy for us to use. And what is one of the things that we use our energy for? Well, our brains, which are incredibly expensive in terms of energy. The running of that brain is also helped by us being warm-blooded, and you'll notice that every highly intelligent animal that we've discussed here is warm-blooded, except for the octopus. Octopuses have several adaptations that help them get around the disadvantages of being cold-blooded. They eat lots of protein, they have 3 hearts, copper-based blood, and to adjust to cold temperatures and keep things running properly, their bodies alter RNA to alter protein functions. These are unusual adaptations that get around some limitations of cold-bloodedness and living in cold environments. We don't have that problem. We have nice, warm, efficient running brains, constant body temperature, super-duper metabolism, which is made even more efficient again by the cooking. But to keep our hot bodies running, we do need to find tons of food, even if we do cook it, and we rely on complicated things like foraging and hunting to get our food, which are complicated, so that pressures us to a higher level still. And that also promotes whatever latent tool-using capability was there. Tool use, which is enhanced by us having opposable thumbs and grippy hands, and we stand on our hind legs so we can use them all the time. So if tool use was a big factor in the development of our intelligence, animals like dolphins, that don't even have hands, would have a difficult time competing with that. I'm sure there are more of these baseline physics-based factors that I'm not thinking of, but even just with these, you can see how they all interconnect and they all sort of prop each other up. If you have a more efficient brain, you can have a more efficient social structure, which can allow you to have more efficient tools, which can allow you to more efficiently get food, and allow you to more efficiently make use of the food, which can enable a bigger brain. And you can see how having any one of these factors is far from inevitable, and having multiple of them even further, which goes some way to explaining why whenever we have these conversations about animal intelligence, there's always a really short list of animals that we're bringing up. Do you notice that? Getting up to the level of high intelligence, as you see in a dolphin or a crow, is already super rare. Like, these do not represent the majority of animals on the planet at all. That set of animals is an extreme minority. You can only come up with a few living examples of it. But that doesn't seem surprising to you. You're not asking why the dolphin is so special, why the crow is so special, why the octopus is so special, but they are. Their intelligence level is almost as rare as ours, and it's entirely unsurprising that ours is even more rare. It requires additional conditions. It can't not be more rare. And it's yet more so if I list the biggest of the conditions, which I've kind of alluded to. It's how we share how to make fire, it's how we share how to make tools. We are so hypersocial that it leads to this obsession with linking our minds together, with trying to understand each other. That theory of mind that I mentioned is a hell of a lot easier to develop when we have some way to gain insight into each other's internal mental state beyond just the observation of actions. Of course, I'm talking about symbolic communication and the culture and the ways of thinking that derive from it. I can only imagine that all those other factors I mentioned have something to do with why this feature was able to develop to such an extreme degree. It's hard to say when it developed or exactly which circumstances prompted it, but one thing's for sure, which is that our intelligence now is vastly different as a result of it. We would not have been nearly as intelligent when that process started, because the entire thing selects for intelligence. We've performed selection on ourselves. We're doing it right now. Look at the way our societies work. Look what they demand of people, or even just what they incentivize and disincentivize. The feedback loop never stopped, and it doesn't seem like it's going to. Now, in general, the fact that there's a species among all of these different species that took this trait to an extreme extent is not very surprising. All of these things I've talked about are relatively simple things, individually not that hard to adapt, each of which makes an outsized amount of difference because of how it feeds back into the system. But it's also not surprising that high intelligence is uncommon and very high intelligence even more so. When you stack prerequisites on top of each other, things get less likely. And this particular trait is a very complicated one, requiring a complicated set of conditions, and again, even then it's not inevitable because that's not how evolution works. Does that answer your question, hopefully? Maybe, but I guess you weren't listening. In any case, though, how is this supposed to point to God? Ignore everything I say. Pretend there's no idea about how this could possibly happen. Nobody's ever even thought about it. How would this state of things point at your answer specifically?
So the point is this: human domination fits nicely into the account of the book of Genesis, where man is told to have authority over all living things, i.e. managing, taking care of, etc.
Holy shit, dude. So humans who are herding goats and catching fish and killing locusts that are eating their crops write down, we're in charge around here. We make the decisions because, of course, in their lives they do. And of course they say their God told them to do it because why wouldn't they? And then you're like, look, this book says that humans are in charge of the animals. Wait a second, I thought we were talking about intelligence. That doesn't say anything about intelligence. It says humans were granted authority by God. Our dominion is not based on intelligence, it's based on divine mandate. We could be as dumb as a slug, and if we had divine mandate, we'd still have it. What does this have to do with anything you were talking about?
So just stop and think and ask yourself, really? Us humans are the only animal that cognitively dominates this planet and the known universe? What are the odds of that?
Well, the odds of some organism having higher intelligence than other organisms is pretty damn close to 100%, I would say. An organism having our intelligence level, that's not 100%, but an organism that already has it having it is 100%. And the organism with the highest level of that trait, which finds itself really only able to communicate symbolically with its own species and not with other ones, is obviously going to recognize that fact. The trait we're talking about, after all, is intelligence, and you'd have to be an idiot not to notice the difference between how humans act and how other animals do. The fact that humans whose biggest habit is communicating their thoughts to each other communicate this one is highly unsurprising. But, I think that you are at this point, unfortunately, doing what I thought maybe you weren't going to do, which is to position humans as intrinsically special and then say, but why does the intrinsically special being get the intelligence? What are the odds of my species, exactly the right species, getting this trait? Thus putting the causal arrow in exactly the wrong direction. I refer you to my previous analogy of the weak anthropic principle versus the strong one. That exhibits the same type of flawed thinking.
Number 2, death.
Wait, we're only on number 2? 2 out of 5. Oh, no, that's bad. What have I done?
You who are watching this are going to die. Everyone who has ever lived is now dead.
Really? Nobody who's ever lived is alive? The party's over, apparently.
So why is there death?
Chemistry, entropy, whatever happens to organisms after breeding age, not being accessible to natural selection. Good enough, I guess.
Why do we even ask ourselves, why is there death?
Well, because we're very curious. That's part of our intelligence, which we already talked about. So we ask questions about all sorts of stuff. That's just kind of what we do. And then, of course, we're organisms who want to survive. That's one of the main things organisms want to do because it's one of the main things that's selected for because it keeps us from dying. So we care about survival and things that prevent it.
So does death prove there is a God? Well, no, but it's something to consider.
Okay, hold on. Okay, I've considered it. I don't see the connection.
Evolution could have given us long life, or at least a longer life than we have.
Okay, but it's not like it cares. It doesn't want to give you a long life. It doesn't want to give you a short one either. Evolution is the epitome of good enough. If your ancestors passed on their genes, that's how it is. Whatever those genes are is what you're stuck with. For some reason, people who don't have a very good grasp of evolution often ask questions like this, like, why didn't evolution give us a prehensile monkey tail? That'd be so useful. That's one of Kent Hovind's ones. Well, the answer is because those genes weren't passed on in your ancestry. It's that simple. Of course, genes for that were passed on to the modern day, just not to you. Organisms with prehensile tails are not the be-all and end-all of life. They're not the only configuration that can survive, and so they're not the only type of organisms that there are. That's the answer. Now, as far as death, it's an even more complicated situation. As I said, you're going to tend to live a lot of years where you're not reproducing, and those years are not acted upon by natural selection. And also, lifespan appears to have a direct relationship to trade-offs regarding things like cancer. It could well be, and in fact it probably is, that there are selection pressures that act upon organisms like you, as opposed to, like, for example, a tortoise like you showed on screen. Different organism, things are going to work a little differently. But for organisms roughly like you, it's very likely the case that the limitation on your lifespan is selected for indirectly, because if it weren't, organisms would tend to die a lot sooner from super-duper ultra cancer, and therefore have less chance of reproducing, and therefore be selected out of the population. And also, I would suspect that there are just some physical constraints that impose impose an upper limit on the lifespan of mammals like yourself regardless.
We basically get old because our body can't keep up with the DNA mutations. The shortening of our telomeres. Telomeres, how do you pronounce that?
Well, the shortening of the telomeres isn't really about keeping up with mutations. It's keeping up with the number of cell divisions, because the telomeres shorten every time the cells divide. And when they get short enough, the cell can't divide anymore, which is part of what I was talking about with cancer trade-offs. Like, sure, your telomeres get short, your cells become unable to reproduce themselves, and that might contribute to death of old age. But natural selection can't act on things that don't affect your genes' survival. How your genes influence what happens in your late life really has no relevance. But if your cells can only reproduce a certain number of times before they're incapable of doing so anymore, that applies to cancer cells too. A mutated cancer cell will eventually stop dividing. And the fact that you have this limit really increases your chance of not getting a cancer so bad that you die before you're able to reproduce. Now, cancer can find a way around that, but the point is that it needs to, when otherwise it wouldn't even need to. Overall, from an evolutionary standpoint, that seems like a pretty good trade-off. Of course, you might hear that and go, that doesn't sound like a good trade-off at all. Death sucks. I'd rather have the cancer. Well, then the cancer would kill you, so you haven't really fixed anything, you might have even made it worse. And also, this isn't about what you like. It's about what ends up with genes getting passed on efficiently.
Look at this. Our bodies don't seem to care.
To care about what? Dying? Okay, well, the body, if we're excluding the brain here, doesn't care about anything at all, and evolution doesn't care if your body cares. What are we talking about here?
Now, there are scientists who say that death is beneficial because it allows us to pass on our genes, creating mutations that are beneficial for our environment. But wait, what? Evolution knows it's better in the long run? In other words, it doesn't want to preserve you right now, but is thinking of others millions of years from now? This evolution sounds strangely like intelligence. It doesn't sound very atheistic to me.
Oh, wow, okay. So you don't know what this conversation's about at all. This needs to be a lot more remedial than I thought. I did not realize that up to this point. Okay, no, evolution doesn't know anything. Evolution isn't a thing. There's not some intelligence there with some goal of benefiting individuals a million years from now. You're a thing. You either reproduce or you don't. And there's a bunch of other organisms too, and they either reproduce or they don't. If you're 15 years old and you have no kids, and you get turbo cancer and die, your genetic material is not present in the next generation. If someone else doesn't have that problem, theirs is. So if having DNA with telomeres sufficiently short to prevent that condition most of the time enables reproduction in an organism, then the reproduction happened. The genes are there the next time around. That's it. That's the extent of what we're talking about. If you make babies, and if you don't, you don't. This is so obvious as to be basically tautologically true. If you reproduce successfully, you're successful at reproduction. And by the way, you expressed that it's weird that evolution doesn't want to preserve you right now. Well, of course, like I said, it's not evolution doing anything. But if you don't die of cancer when you're 15, when with unlimited cell division you would've, you are being preserved right now. You're not being preserved later, when you're old and not making babies, when the dumb, mindless process of your genes replicating themselves isn't happening anymore. What about this sounds in any way intentional to you? And I don't mean the human intention to reproduce, I mean the selection acting upon your genes. And by the way, people could object to you saying, evolution doesn't sound very atheistic to me, because evolution is not some atheist idea. It's entirely compatible with the existence of a god. But one could argue that the process itself, as such, doesn't require a god to be interacting with it, and therefore it's not a theistic process. So you could say that regardless of whether there in fact is a god or not, it's an atheistic process. That's assuming we don't say that God is constantly pulling the strings of evolution, constantly guiding it. But I would say at that point, that's not really evolution by natural selection. That's evolution by artificial selection by God. In a universe with a god, evolution would be an atheistic process if it were a process of physics, where God made the rules and let things play out, where the process operates independently of his direct control. I'm only mentioning all of that because I'm hoping that you're not so confused that you think evolution is some sort of an atheist idea and incompatible with theism.
Instead, we all know that death sucks, and that points to the existence of a god who tells us that it sucks.
What? No. It points to us thinking it sucks. Why would us having opinions about stuff point to someone else telling us what opinions to have? You think AI-generated Labubus look good in your video. That points to the existence of a god who tells you AI-generated Labubus look good. What the hell kind of reasoning is that?
Every human being feels this. We want continuance. We want to go on.
Yeah, we're animals. That's the number one thing life does. Number one, for the first bunch of years, survive. Number two, make babies. Those are the number one and number two things that we are naturally selected to do. Everything else that we're genetically inclined to do serves one of those two goals, sometimes in a roundabout kind of way, but nevertheless. And it could be argued that most of the cultural things we do have at least some connection to those two urges. Of all of the aspects of human behavior and thinking that you could try to disconnect from evolution, this is the dumbest possible one. This is the basis of evolution.
So whenever you're thinking about death, first stop and ask yourself, why is my material brain even thinking about death?
Because we're intelligent enough to think about the future and realize that's a thing that's going to happen. And then our survival instinct kicks in and we go, wait a second, I don't want that. Obviously. It's the most obvious answer to anything ever. How did you not think of this?
To quote King Solomon, eternity is written in their hearts.
How could he have known that humans typically don't want to die? I can't even believe that he realized that. What a novel insight. Man, this is almost as impressive as the time that Jesus pointed out that people have to breathe and eat to live. The Bible never misses.
All right, point number 3, life. So we just went from death and now we're at life.
Okay. I'm really tired of this. How long has it been? Probably 30, 35 minutes? Do I have to continue with this? Okay, I looked ahead. There's, if we make life in a lab, that'll only prove that life requires intelligence, which is the kind of thing where they're going to claim victory no matter what happens. Life never been made in a lab? Well, you've never made life in a lab. It must be impossible. God must have done it. If you do make life in a lab by simulating natural conditions, well, you had to use your intelligence to do that. God must have done it. It's silliness. They already know what answer they want. They're going to say that answer no matter what. Who cares? Now that I say that, I guess that applies to every argument. I guess the question is why I bother at all. Anyway, then there's the moral argument. That one I can bust out in 2 seconds because he doesn't even bother making the argument himself. He's like, yeah, I went and asked ChatGPT to tell me.
I actually presented this question to ChatGPT and the problem of suffering and what it assumes. And this is what artificial intelligence had to say to me.
And he reads a bunch of stuff out, but the relevant part is point 2, which says that if good and evil are subjective, if suffering is not objectively wrong, then there's no contradiction. And he's like, yeah, see?
Exactly. Bad is only bad if objective morality exists.
No, bad is only objectively bad if objective morality exists. But yes, that's the point. That's why this argument applies to worldviews that say there's objective evil. That's why it gets applied, for example, to the Christian God. Christianity proposes that evil is objective, and the argument is about claimed contradictions between the nature of that God, being supposedly all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing, and the supposed objective reality of evil proposed by Christians. Whether it succeeds or not is not the point. It's an internal critique of Christianity. And to say, well, if you don't accept the ideas of Christianity, then you can't make this argument, makes no sense. It's about the internal consistency of your worldview. We're not talking about anyone else's.
The reason we even ask why is there suffering in the world is because we all recognize that the world is messed up. We all intrinsically know it wasn't meant to be this way.
No, we ask that because humans suffer, and suffering is a response to stuff that potentially reduces your ability to survive. That's why we feel suffering with certain inputs. In other words, the things that make us suffer are in some way, possibly indirectly, threatening to our basic biological drives. Suffering objectively occurs. The subjective experience objectively happens. We objectively see it as having negative value. The subjective evaluation of it as bad objectively happens, but that doesn't make it objectively bad. This is the same basic question all over again as why do humans care if they die? Why do we think about it? Why do we have opinions about it? Because we're animals. Again, survival is the number one thing that we do. This in no way implies the existence of a god to the exclusion of evolution, or indeed to the exclusion of anything else. What about this specifically points to a god? It's compatible with a god, but that's not the same thing as pointing to a god.
And then when we open the book of Genesis, we read, yeah, it wasn't meant to be this way.
Yeah, go figure that humans who don't like suffering write a book complaining about it and having their god echo their feelings on it. What a mystery. So point number 5 is just, Jesus was this humble guy and didn't seem like anybody special and didn't do all the big impressive stuff that other people did. And yet he's really important today and people know who he was and there's a religion about him and BC and AD refer to him. And the most interesting part of this whole thing is this AI generated picture of Jesus sitting on his ass. There's not really an argument here for anything. Like, yeah, great, there's a religion built around a guy, I know. But there's a couple things I'll respond to towards the end of the argument. Here we go.
This man, Jesus of Nazareth, has become the central figure of our entire human race.
Okay, cool your jets. Tone it down a little bit. The central figure of the entire human race. Okay, I get that you're a Christian who thinks this, because you think the central point of every human life is to believe in Jesus. But you're trying to make an argument to convince other people, and I look around and I see Muslims think Muhammad is a lot more central than Jesus, and everybody else who's not a Christian just kind of doesn't care at all. And put together, that's the vast majority of the planet. You could have just said he's an incredibly important figure or something like that, and nobody would have disagreed with you. Not even the mythicists, because regardless, the figure is very important. But no, you couldn't resist.
History had every reason to forget this man, but it never did, and I don't think it ever will. So yes, even this point by itself proves, or points to, or reveals that there's something truly greater out there beyond ourselves.
That there's a religion about a guy who didn't seem that special at the time. Why? A cultural meme is a cultural meme. It could be about anything. Just like with all the other arguments here, I don't understand even how you think this points to God. From my perspective, it seems like you just want to say it, and that's good enough. Like, it doesn't actually matter what you say, as long as you've talked long enough to feel like you have some sort of excuse to say, therefore God.
This has been JP. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, guys.
And just like that, we're done. Thank you for coming along with me on this one. I kind of liked this one. If you would, subscribe and like before you go. Thank you. Huge thanks to all of my supporters. This train's still chugging along thanks to you, and I really do appreciate it. See you next time.